It began with a steak, or rather the illusion of one, perfectly seared, expertly plated, served in a restaurant where every detail gleamed with luxury and success. But beneath the sizzle of the grill and the gleam of polished silverware, something else simmered, something that couldn't be captured in earnings reports or Michelin star aspirations. Jack Reynolds, founder and CEO of Brooks Steakhouse, had spent years building his empire. To the world, he was the golden standard of hospitality, interviewed, applauded, celebrated. But tonight, he wasn't Jack Reynolds. He was Mr. Anderson, a weary traveler dining alone, hiding in plain sight within the very walls he'd once designed to dazzle. 3 days before, he'd sat in his penthouse reading anonymous employee reviews, unfiltered, scathing, and heartbreakingly honest. Words like exhausted, ignored, replaceable danced across the screen. Words no CEO ever wants to hear. But instead of dismissing them, Jack felt something twist inside him. Curiosity? Guilt? Maybe something deeper. An echo of the man he used to be before the suits, the accolades, and the distance power builds between people. That night, he chose to shed the armor of title and wealth. Out went the Rolex and Armani. In came faded jeans, a scuffed pair of boots, and a rented Honda Civic. It wasn't a disguise, it was a return. His destination? The original Brooks Steakhouse in Chicago, the crown jewel of his chain, the flagship location. If cracks existed in his system, they would show here. As he pulled into the lot filled with Porsches and Bentleys, Jack felt like an outsider in his own kingdom. The familiar glow of the signage, the pristine black facade, it all looked flawless. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Perfection on the outside often hides decay on the inside. Inside, the ambiance was as he remembered. Soft jazz floating in the air, clinking glassware, walls lined with mahogany. The staff moved with almost mechanical grace. Their uniforms were perfect. Their smiles, too. But Jack noticed what he had never seen before, the tightness around their eyes, the strain beneath the poise, the way no one truly breathed between steps. That's when he met Natalie, a waitress in her mid-20s with tired green eyes and burn marks on her fingers. Her voice was gentle, professional, almost too polished. But Jack saw it now, the mask of someone doing everything right in a system that never asked how she felt doing it. He ordered the ribeye, his restaurant's signature. Natalie nodded and left with a weary grace that struck him more than her words ever could. He watched her serve others, memorizing names, offering small kindnesses, never breaking rhythm. Yet every now and then he caught it, a glance at the clock, a wince of fatigue, the way she subtly leaned on her left foot to relieve pressure. No metric could capture that kind of exhaustion. And then it happened. With a glass of water in one hand and a practiced smile on her lips, Natalie slipped something beneath Jack's plate. A folded note, dangerously discreet. Jack's heart skipped. This wasn't just dinner anymore. This was a message, a risk, a cry for truth in a room built on illusion. And as he slowly unfolded the paper in his lap, he realized this steak wasn't going to be the highlight of his night. What came next would tear open everything he thought he knew about his business and about himself. The note lay beneath the edge of Jack's dinner plate like a landmine wrapped in linen. Small, unassuming, but the moment he saw it, something in him shifted. His breath caught in his throat, his fingers paused mid-reach for his wine glass. In that instant, the soft hum of the restaurant vanished. It was as if the world held its breath with him. He waited, watched Natalie walk away, her back tall, her shoulders square with purpose, not fear. Not a single twitch betrayed her action, not a glance, not a sign of recklessness. If anything, it had been the work of someone who'd practiced restraint her entire life, someone who had too much at stake to be careless. Jack's hands trembled as he carefully slid the note into his lap, unfolding it beneath the table. The handwriting was delicate but sure, the kind of script that revealed intent. Every word felt like a scalpel slicing through the facade he'd spent years constructing. I know who you are, Mr. Reynolds. I recognized you the moment you walked in. I've seen your photos in magazines, studied your rise, admired your empire. But I need you to know something your reports and charts won't tell you. This place is killing us. Not just me. All of us. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. Jack didn't blink. He read the note again, slower this time. Natalie's voice echoed in his mind with each line. She'd written about 60-hour work weeks, missed birthdays, choosing between medicine and rent. She'd written about fear, the kind you tuck into your apron pocket before every shift. Fear of missing work, fear of making mistakes, fear of being invisible until it's convenient to be discarded. She ended it with, "If you really want to know what it's like to work here, meet me in the alley at 11 p.m. I'll tell you everything. But please, don't ignore this. We need help." She signed it simply, Natalie. Jack folded the note slowly, fingers tightening as if trying to contain something rising in his chest. Guilt, disbelief, or maybe shame. He looked around the restaurant. Everything looked fine, elegant, professional, polished, just as he designed it. But now he saw the truth. Natalie wasn't just tired, she was drained. And yet she continued moving table to table like a masterful actress on stage, smile fixed, tone warm. Not out of deception, but survival. Across the room, she crouched beside a toddler in a booster seat, cooing as if nothing in the world was wrong. To the family, she was the perfect waitress. But Jack knew what it cost. He started seeing the cracks in every corner. Marcus, barely out of college, moved at breakneck speed, sweat clinging to his collar. His eyes darted with fear every time he dropped a utensil. Diana, older, possibly in her 50s, walked stiffly, her knee clearly giving her pain. But not once did she stop moving. She smiled when her back was turned, winced when no one looked. Jack stared at his steak. It was perfect. The seasoning, the sear, the marbling, but it might as well have been ash in his mouth. He pushed the plate away. For the first time in his life, he had no appetite for success. By 10:45 p.m., Jack had parked around the block, sitting in his car with the note in his hands. He read it again and again. Every line burned deeper than the last. Natalie had risked everything. If anyone else had seen her pass that note, a manager, another server, she could have been fired, branded a traitor, labeled ungrateful. And yet, she had done it anyway, for herself, for her coworkers, for the people who kept this empire alive in ways Jack's quarterly reviews never accounted for. At 10:58, he stepped out into the alley behind Brooks Steakhouse. It was nothing like the front. No polished wood, no warm lighting. Just dumpsters, steam rising from kitchen vents, and the pungent smell of grease, metal, and sweat. A single flickering light bulb cast jagged shadows across the pavement. Then the door creaked open. Natalie stepped out. Gone was the pristine uniform. She wore a hoodie and jeans now. Her hair was down, and for the first time Jack saw her not as a waitress, but as a young woman. Tired, yes, but brave. She met his eyes and didn't flinch. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I had to," Jack replied. "Your note, it changed everything." She studied him, perhaps searching his face for signs of performance, corporate damage control, hollow sympathy, but what she saw there made her nod. "So," she said, "you want to know what it's like to work for you?" Jack leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "Yes, and I want to hear it from you. No filters, no rehearsed talking points." Natalie looked down the alley once, then began to speak. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. What she offered was raw truth, the kind that didn't need embellishment. She spoke of 10-hour shifts with no breaks, of going home with burns and bruises, of customers snapping their fingers like she was a servant, of management looking the other way, of the unspoken rule, don't complain, don't get sick, don't slow down. And then she spoke of others. Maria, a single mom who'd worked doubles every weekend for a year just to keep her 3 kids fed. Her youngest once asked her if she still lived with them because she was always gone before sunrise and home after bedtime. Carlos, a line cook with a fractured wrist. He couldn't afford to stop working long enough for surgery, so he wrapped it in duct tape and kept slicing onions until his fingers went numb. She paused. "We're not asking for handouts," she said. "We're not even asking for comfort, just dignity, the chance to breathe, to matter." Jack looked away, throat tight. The stories weren't abstract anymore. They weren't data points on a chart. They were lives. And he'd built his wealth on their silence. "Why didn't anyone say anything before?" he asked, genuinely baffled. Natalie didn't miss a beat. "We did. No one listened." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy, inescapable. Jack thought back to years of polished boardroom meetings, each one featuring charts and satisfaction scores. He thought of anonymous surveys, ignored. Exit interviews, dismissed. Complaints that never reached him because middle management filtered them out to protect the brand. He hadn't heard because he didn't want to hear. But tonight, in the dim glow of a back alley bulb, with Natalie's voice raw from speaking truths long buried, he listened. And for the first time in decades, Jack Reynolds felt powerless, but not in a bad way, in the way that meant surrendering ego, making space for something real to grow. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice husky, "for trusting me, for not giving up." Natalie shook her head. "I didn't write that note because I trusted you. I wrote it because I hoped I could." And then, with a half smile that carried both exhaustion and quiet resolve, she added, "You still have to earn that trust." Jack nodded. "Then that's what I'll do." She turned to leave, then paused. "There's more I didn't say, about the systems, the managers, the turnover. If you really want to fix this, I'm not the only voice you'll need to hear." "I'll listen to every one of them," Jack promised. "Every single one." And as Natalie disappeared into the night, Jack remained in the alley a little longer, looking up at the building he had built, no longer with pride, but with purpose. Because sometimes, all it takes to shatter an empire of silence is one voice willing to speak. Jack didn't sleep. He couldn't. His penthouse, usually a sanctuary of silence and status, now echoed with guilt. The $1,000,000 view from the floor-to-ceiling windows no longer felt like an accomplishment. It felt like distance. Distance from everything he had once believed in, and more importantly, from everyone who had built the very foundation he stood on. He paced. Past the Italian marble kitchen island, past the leather sofa imported from Florence, past the walls adorned with photos of ribbon cuttings and framed magazine covers. Visionary restaurateur of the year, America's hospitality mogul. He stared at one in particular, an article titled, "The Man Who Made Service a Science." The irony turned his stomach. At 3 a.m., Jack opened his laptop. But instead of diving into profit forecasts or supplier negotiations, he opened something he hadn't touched in months, the employee records database. For the next 3 hours, he did something he'd never done before. He didn't skim, he read. Maria Gonzalez, 5 years with the company, single mother of 3, never missed a shift, customer feedback, glowing, salary, $12 an hour. He calculated the numbers in his head. After rent, utilities, childcare, there was nothing left. Carlos Rivera, line cook, 4 years on the job, 2 denied medical leave requests, still showed up. Why? Because 1 missed paycheck meant eviction. Diana Blake, dishwasher, 62 years old, 2 slipped discs, still working 5 days a week. Why wasn't anyone helping her? Why hadn't he known? Because they were never people to him before. They were line items, efficiency rates, labor costs. That morning, Jack arrived late to the quarterly board meeting. Not in a suit, not with a deck of glossy slides, and not with his usual air of command. Instead, he walked in wearing the same jeans and sweater he'd worn the night before, holding a stack of employee files. The room fell silent. 12 board members stared at him, confused, some already irritated. Patricia Walsh, head of investor relations, narrowed her eyes. "Jack, is everything all right?" He didn't sit. "I want to tell you about Maria Gonzalez." Confusion swept the table. "She's one of our shift supervisors in Chicago," Jack continued. 5 years of spotless service, 3 kids, works 50 hours a week and still can't afford basic dental care. Robert Chen folded his arms. "What does this have to do with our Q3 projections?" Jack held up a hand. "Everything. I know you came here expecting charts and margins, but what you're going to hear today is about the people behind those numbers, because they've been invisible for too long, even to me." He opened another file. Carlos Rivera, 2 denied surgery requests. Why? Because we couldn't afford to lose him for 2 weeks. He's still flipping steaks with a wrist that hasn't healed. A murmur passed through the room. Jack didn't stop. Diana Blake hasn't taken a day off in 8 months, not because she's dedicated, but because she's scared. She told her manager she has back issues. They docked her hours instead of giving her support. Patricia cut in sharply. "Jack, I appreciate the sentiment, but this is a corporate board. We're here to review growth metrics and make decisions in the interest of shareholder value." Jack looked her dead in the eyes. "Exactly, and I'm telling you that our version of value is broken." Chen scoffed. "So what are you proposing? A charity?" "No," Jack said calmly. "A pilot, a better way. 1 location Chicago, higher wages, guaranteed sick leave, educational support, and a shift in management philosophy from extraction to dignity." The room erupted. Some board members looked bewildered, others incensed. That'll kill margins, someone shouted. Shareholders won't tolerate decreased profits, another warned. People are replaceable, Patricia snapped. You can't redesign the entire machine because of a few sob stories. Jack slammed the files on the table. The sound echoed like a gavel. They're not sob stories, they're truths. And if we can't run a business without breaking people, then maybe we shouldn't be running one at all. Silence. Chen leaned forward, face stern. You're having a midlife crisis. This is emotional manipulation. We operate in a free market. Employees can leave if they don't like it. They don't leave, Jack said quietly. They stay and suffer. And we built it that way. He passed around a one-page proposal. Here's what I'm asking. One location, 90 days. We raise wages, offer basic benefits, and treat our staff like human beings. We track turnover, customer satisfaction, and revenue. If it fails, I'll shut it down myself. The board fell into a tense hush. Jack continued. Do you know what it costs us to replace a server? Over $3,000. Our turnover rate last quarter was 78%. You do the math. If we reduce that by even 30%, we save millions. He looked around the room, daring anyone to argue. This isn't just moral, it's logical, and it's overdue. Patricia still looked unconvinced. And what happens if the pilot fails? Then we go back to business as usual, Jack said. But at least we tried something that didn't rely on burnout as a business model. A long silence followed. Finally, Chen spoke again. And if it works, then we change everything, Jack said. From the ground up. Another silence, this one heavier. Then, begrudgingly, Patricia nodded. Fine, 90 days, Chicago location, you're personally accountable. I wouldn't have it any other way. As the board adjourned, murmuring and exchanging wary glances, Jack stayed seated, staring at the files on the table. They weren't just paperwork anymore. They were mirrors. And for the first time, he didn't flinch. The morning after the board meeting, Jack Reynolds didn't walk into the Chicago location of Brooks Steakhouse in a suit. He came in wearing a plain black t-shirt, a pair of jeans, and a determined look. The sun had barely risen, and the kitchen staff were already unloading deliveries. This time, when they glanced up and saw him, they didn't see the CEO. They saw a man who was choosing to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. Jack had spent the previous night crafting a plan that felt less like a corporate initiative and more like a personal mission. It wasn't just about damage control. It was about doing something right. The very first item on his list, new living wage adjustments for every hourly employee at the Chicago location. No more minimum wage plus tips. Every worker would now start at a wage that actually allowed them to live. He'd also launched a new scheduling policy, no more punishing back-to-back closing and opening shifts. Employees would have predictable, balanced schedules, and most importantly, they'd receive guaranteed sick leave and medical benefits, no longer forced to choose between their health and their rent. The announcement went out internally that morning. At first, it landed like a quiet ripple. People read the updates on the staff bulletin board, blinking. Some whispered in disbelief. A few even laughed nervously, unsure if it was a prank. But when the revised paychecks hit their direct deposits at the end of the week, disbelief turned into stunned silence. And then, gratitude. Jack didn't just stop at policy. He came back into the restaurant undercover, not as a stranger this time, but as someone trying to learn. Wearing an apron and name tag reading John, he bussed tables, cleaned the back counters, and helped restock the wine rack. He took notes, not of errors, but of experiences. Natalie noticed him first, of course. She gave him a wary smile as he handed off a tray of empty plates. Still undercover? She teased, half joking. Jack grinned. This time I'm not hiding, I'm learning. Her smile faded a bit, replaced with something more serious. People are hopeful, but we've been hopeful before. This feels different, but we're still waiting to see if it's real. Jack nodded, no defensiveness in his face. That's fair. Across the kitchen, Maria Gonzalez was finishing a prep shift. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't racing to get to a double. Her shift ended at 2 p.m., and she had plans that didn't involve collapsing into sleep. She was going home to cook dinner with her kids. Not for them, with them. Later that night, Jack watched her from across the restaurant as she laughed with the kitchen team. Her shoulders no longer curled with stress. It was a small thing, but it was everything. Carlos Rivera, who had been working with a fractured wrist for months, finally submitted the paperwork for medical leave. He'd been skeptical when the new benefits were announced, but after a one-on-one meeting with Jack himself, where the CEO assured him personally that it was paid leave and not a trap, Carlos scheduled his surgery. The day Carlos left for treatment, he hugged Natalie. "Tell the boss thanks," he said, "and tell him I'll be back. For the first time in years, I want to come back." Meanwhile, customers began to notice something different. The smiles were more genuine. The service, still excellent, now felt warmer, more human. The food hadn't changed, but the energy in the air had. It was as if the soul of the restaurant had been scrubbed clean, revealing something vibrant beneath. Jack continued working quietly, blending in, staying after hours, asking questions no CEO had ever cared to ask. He watched Natalie organize side work with a level of grace and authority that no manager had ever officially granted her. One evening, after a particularly smooth dinner rush, he found her sitting near the employee lockers, sipping tea. He sat next to her, silent at first. She glanced at him sideways. "You're not here to evaluate me, are you?" "No," Jack said softly. "I'm here to thank you." Natalie tilted her head. "You didn't just speak up," Jack said. "You gave me a roadmap. You trusted me with the truth when you had every reason not to. And because of that, I get to rebuild something better." Natalie studied him for a long moment. "You didn't just hear me," she said finally. "You believed me." Jack smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. "You showed me what leadership really looks like." From that moment forward, Natalie became more than just a waitress. She became a mentor in her own right. Jack began inviting managers to small group sessions where he shared everything he had learned, not just about wages or metrics, but about empathy, about how dignity wasn't a perk, it was a baseline. He introduced new manager onboarding protocols. Each new hire had to spend their first week doing every frontline job, from washing dishes to handling angry customers. "You can't lead from a tower," he said in those meetings. "You have to lead from the floor." Slowly, the culture shifted. Marcus, the young server who used to run tables until his shirt was soaked in sweat, started showing up early, not because he had to, but because he wanted to help train the new hires. Diana, the older server who used to move with barely hidden pain, received a special orthopedic-friendly workstation and now led pre-shift check-ins. "Let's check your hearts before your trays," she'd joke. And Natalie? She got offered the manager role Jack had originally saved for someone with more traditional leadership experience. At first, she declined. "I don't need a title to make a difference," she said. Jack understood, but insisted. "We need leaders who've walked through the fire, and you're not just a survivor, you're a builder." She accepted, but only on the condition that any promotion she received would come with mentoring responsibilities. "No one should rise alone," she told him. One night, Jack stood near the exit of the restaurant, arms folded as he watched his staff finish a flawless dinner service. There were no fireworks, no loud declarations of victory, just a quiet, thriving hum, the kind that only comes from people who feel seen. A new server approached him timidly. "Mr. Reynolds?" He turned. "Please call me Jack. I just wanted to say this place is different from where I used to work. I don't dread coming in, and that means a lot." Jack nodded, warmth rising in his chest. "That means more to me than you know." He looked around, at Maria laughing in the break room, at Carlos texting in recovery, at Natalie guiding a new hire through table settings. He realized that this wasn't the end of a transformation. It was the very first step. Later that week, Jack found a quiet moment to himself in the back office. He pulled out a copy of Natalie's original note, the one she'd slipped under his plate. He'd laminated it, not out of vanity, but out of reverence. It now sat on his desk, not behind glass, but within reach. It reminded him every day of where this journey began, and more importantly, of the responsibility that came with listening. In the months that followed, Jack would roll out similar changes to more locations, slowly, methodically, with care. But this first step, this single restaurant in Chicago, it became the blueprint, not for profit, but for purpose. And as Jack walked through the doors one final time that night, he turned to look at the wall near the exit. A new sign had been placed there. Not flashy, not corporate, just a simple message in elegant script, "Here you matter." And for once, It wasn't just a slogan. It was the truth. The night was quiet. No red carpets, no cameras, no stock tickers flashing green. Just the soft hum of traffic in the distance and the gentle clink of glasses behind a window. Jack Reynolds now saw differently. He didn't enter Brooks Steakhouse through the front this time. He stood across the street, hands in his pockets, watching. It looked the same on the outside. Warm amber lights, polished glass, elegant patrons dining beneath crystal chandeliers. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. Laughter echoed from the kitchen, not strained or performative, real. Staff moved with rhythm and energy, but no longer like clockwork machines. There was humanity now, moments of eye contact, soft jokes, a shared momentum instead of individual desperation. At the far end of the dining room, Jack spotted Natalie, her ponytail bouncing slightly as she guided two new servers through the floor plan. She wasn't commanding them with a clipboard or raised voice. She was mentoring, hands-on, patient and proud. They leaned into her with trust, absorbing every word, every gesture. Her presence had changed, no longer cautious and compressed, but open, empowered. She had become the kind of leader Jack used to believe could only come from corner offices. He exhaled slowly, watching her laugh with a customer. She carried a sense of dignity now, not because it was granted, but because it had been fought for, earned, and then given back tenfold. Back in the break room, a place once filled with silence and aching backs, now hung a new sign. You matter here. Not corporate speak, not a branding slogan, just truth, a message painted by the staff themselves in block letters on the old beige wall. Jack had seen a picture of it earlier that week from the new GM Clara, a message she'd sent him at midnight with no caption, just the photo. But he didn't need context, because now he understood what success really meant. It wasn't in the quarterly profits, though those too had improved as turnover dropped and repeat customers surged. It wasn't in expansion. It wasn't in accolades or magazines. It was in the way Diana now walked with ease, her hours adjusted to accommodate physical therapy. It was in the way Carlos had come back from surgery with a smile and a handshake. It was in the way Maria had started a savings account for her kids' future and still got home in time to read bedtime stories. Jack stood there watching it all like a man seeing color for the first time. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Inside it was a certified check made out to a local nursing program, full tuition, books, and a living stipend, all in Natalie's name. Alongside it was a handwritten letter, unsigned. You showed me what leadership really looks like. Thank you for being the kind of leader I never knew I needed. A grateful student. The next morning, Natalie opened the envelope between breakfast prep and the start of her shift. Her hands trembled as she read the note, her eyes welling up. She didn't cry, but for a moment she stood absolutely still, absorbing it. Then she folded the note carefully, slipped it into her apron, and got back to work. With a smile that came not from obligation, but from deep, unwavering joy. That night, Jack sat alone in his apartment, no longer a penthouse to him, just a place with walls. He looked out over the city, reflecting not on what had changed in his company, but what had changed in him. He had been a builder of systems, of brands, of scale. But none of it had mattered, not really, until he learned to build something else, dignity. And dignity, he now understood, wasn't handed down. It was built from the inside out. His voice echoed faintly in his own mind, as if narrating someone else's redemption. Success isn't measured by revenue. It's measured by the dignity you build into your business. The legacy you leave isn't in numbers, it's in names, and the lives those names touch. The screen begins to fade to black. But just before the final frame, a flash of another diner, another waitress, another glance that lingers too long when Jack enters. But Natalie wasn't the only one with a story. In another city, another server had a secret, and when Jack walked in, it was already too late. Stay tuned.